Okay, and we're live. I'm here with Doc Brown, linguist again, and we're going to be talking about linguistics. We're going to be talking about language contact, loan words, pidgin languages, creoles, and how languages meet up. There's lots of really interesting stuff that happens with cultural contact between when people who speak different languages meet, and then sometimes they make a new language. Sometimes people adopt the language of the others. Sometimes they merge together, and based on different rules, they become a pidgin or a creole language. Pidgin languages being like trade languages, right? They're like not
Yeah,
even full languages.
not full languages.
Um, right, but I'll let you start with what you want to start with. Start with loan words. You said right.
Loan words. Yeah. Well, hello again, and thank you for having me back on. And hello, everyone.
Yeah,
Um,
anytime, obviously.
yeah. Loan words are probably the. I think loan words are probably just the best way to dip our toe into the frigid waters of language contact because we have so many of them in English, and so this is like a great example. Like
Right.
English has so many loan words in it.
English
Many
is a
words.
Frankenstein language. It's
Oh, it
crazy.
is totally. I mean, it's kind of a meme, but it's sort of also true. English is three languages on top of each other in a trench coat. I mean, it's actually probably more than three. Um,
Right.
English is a Frankenstein language for sure. We're getting into spooky season. That's a good metaphor. Yeah.
Hmm.
So drawing from American English in particular. So the theoretically the language. I'm guessing most of your audience is either Brits or Americans.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm gonna guess. Maybe if I'm
Unfortunately,
wrong.
I've said this before for the Canadians. I guess the UK is larger, but number one is USA, and then number two is the UK, and Canada number three. And I would love for the Canadians to be number two, but there's like twice as many people in the UK, so I get it.
Yeah, no, I love Canadians as well. I mean, yeah, smoking a dart outside of Tim Hortons in a snowstorm, right? I mean, what's more Canadian than that?
Berta.
Yeah.
All right.
Um,
Keep going.
yeah, sorry.
Oh, it's all right.
Yeah. So there's a handful of words actually that first entered into the English language in your neck of the woods out there in New England. So and or the Eastern Seaboard. So I thought we could maybe start with a couple of those. Um, so if we want to look at, and I can just send this to you here if you're interested. Wiktionary is maybe not the greatest thing for making an academic paper, but it's good for a good like quick lookup. So I can send you this link here if you want to put stuff up on
Yeah, yeah, go
screen.
for it.
Now let's see, will it work? There we go. Um, so raccoon, trash pandas. Everyone loves trash pandas, right? I love trash
Of
pandas.
course, I do.
Yeah. Um, so raccoons now do exist in Europe, but they didn't originally exist in Europe. They're a North American species. Um, Raccoons, yeah, they're cool. I love raccoons.
I
Um,
do as well.
Tells you something about my personality. But so the word raccoon, I mean, we obviously it is an English word now, right? Like that is, I have never learned any. I mean, aside from the internet names like Trash Panda or whatever, that's largely a joke, right? Like I don't. You could walk around. I guess trash. I've actually maybe heard some people reference them or refer to them as trash pandas in everyday speech now, but I feel like that's not quite the word, right? Like it's still
Definitely like
raccoon.
millennial slang. Yeah.
Millennials, yeah. Raccoon was the word that I learned growing up, right in America. Like, mommy, daddy, what are those crazy little creatures going through our trash can? That's a raccoon. And I was obviously, I was raised as many millennials were by complete Beatle maniacs, which is not a bad thing. So Rocky Raccoon, that song, stuff like that. So
Yeah, I
raccoons.
love that song.
It's a good song. Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like only the Brits would say raccoon. I feel like a good American would say raccoon, raccoon,
Raccoon, yeah.
raccoon,
That's how
not
I
raccoon.
pronounce it.
But this word is not originally English, so it's become English. Like raccoon is totally an English word now. It did not start out as an English word, and this is an example of a loan word. Um, so loan
Right.
words are words taken. They're not really loaned because they're like a long-term loan. They're never really given back, right? We call them loan words, taken from one language and plopped into another language. And so you can have loan words for a variety of reasons, and there's many, many, many of them in English. Raccoon is just a fun one. Why is the word raccoon not originally an English word? Well, I mean, I guess the simple answer is something like because English speakers never encountered raccoons until they got to the English, well, what became the English colonies
Right. Because
to
there
North America.
weren't
Yeah,
raccoons in it's a new world animal.
right. So it's a brand new for them, right? For English speakers, it's a brand new uh, Very cool. That's awesome. I'll
Yeah.
look into that. Thank you.
Comment that says, because I'm going to share this on audio as well. A
Yeah.
coon's age is a saying that means a long time based off of a folk legend that raccoons had a long lifespan. Welcome back. I'm going to keep calling you Ironheart, F-E Heart, because I assume that's what you're going for with that. It's easier to say than Fee Heart.
Your heart is
Um,
very ferric.
Ferric?
And
What does that mean?
ferric, yeah, like related to iron. Ferrous.
Oh, is that okay? I've never heard
But
that.
yeah, if you,
Oh, Pharaohs. I've heard the word Pharaohs.
sorry,
Oh,
this was
my car.
yeah. I'm making stupid linguistic puns. Apologies. Yeah.
That's okay.
That's what I do. So raccoon, yeah. So I mean, English speakers never encounter raccoons, and I mean, if you've ever encountered a raccoon, maybe you're like getting up early morning, late night, you go out to take your trash out, and there is a raccoon inside your trash can. It is a little startling to see a raccoon, right? They're like, "What the hell is this little critter?"
Little trash panda.
Yeah. So, what are you going to call this thing? Well, I mean, this is an example of contact not just with a new species, and this is one of the sort of the prime times that you can get loan words.
Right.
It can kind of go in two routes. There's sort of two main linguistic strategies for getting around this problem of what the hell do I call this animal? I can make a new word based on pre-existing parts of my language. And that's, I mean, technically panda is a loan word too, but trash panda is sort of in a way kind of like it's a neologism. It's a new word. We call them a trash panda.
Yeah, it's a multi-step conjunction. That's interesting. Right.
Yeah. Or you can borrow in the local word for that pre-existing species, which is what
Right.
English did. So from Powhatan, which is the language of Pocahontas.
Right, and
This is
that's
first
mid-Atlantic, right? Like
mid-Atlantic, roughly Virginia estuary area, kind of. Yeah. Sadly, has died. I do believe they are trying to resurrect it, which is cool. I wish them the best of luck. But yeah, hopefully
it's
that
Eastern Algonquin.
Eastern Algonquin. Yeah, yeah.
I know they've been bringing back Wampanoag, Wampanoag. I don't know, from Massachusetts as well, and they're doing this with work from recreating from what they have.
Yeah.
Mostly a Bible that was translated from a long time ago. That's cool. Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of these Native American languages were lost to time and have to try to be recreated based on linguistic rules that are really cool. Maybe another time we can get into that type of thing.
Reconstructions would be fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be
But,
some like
sorry,
deep, that would be smoking some real diachronic linguistics. Just like that would be some, we would go in, that'd be like a crazy DMT trip, but it would be fun if we want to do reconstructions. Yeah. So Powhatan, the Powhatan speakers, they called this animal Arakun, which is from a longer form. So even this term had been shortened for them. They had said it so much, it had been kind of shortened down. And I'm definitely going to butcher all of these indigenous languages, so apologies, 1,000 apologies. Just doing my best.
Yeah.
Arakunem.
I checked to see if there was a pronunciation on Wiki, but there isn't.
There is not. Yeah. I always have to tell people, just because you're a linguist doesn't mean that you know all languages. It's like the meme. What, you're a linguist? Why don't you know all languages? It's like, well, yeah. I do my best with the ones I know. So there's a word in Powhatan, because as is often the case with indigenous North American languages, one word can kind of stand in for an entire sentence in English because of how the language is structured. So Arakunem meant, or means, when it was spoken, it meant he scratches with his hands. So that is what raccoons do, right? They clean food. They clean food with their little hands, and they put it in their mouth. Yeah, they
so cute.
Yeah, it is very cute.
They run on just 2 feet.
Yeah,
like little humans.
I know.
Like
I love them.
Thieving humans.
I know, little thieves. So raccoons. So right, the word raccoon in English has undergone some definite changes as it's been borrowed in, right? So what was once what an early English colonist would have heard as arakun, right? So the just drops off completely, right? Now in Powhatan, all of those syllables mean something and are sort of they're important to that word's meaning, but not in English, because we're taking this word completely out of its linguistic context and dropping it into a completely unrelated language, in this case, English. And so essentially what happens is English speakers hear, I'm putting that in scare quotes, hear something different than is pronounced.
Right.
Um, so oftentimes, obviously we do hear with our ears, and you need working ears and eardrums and all those things to hear. We hear sounds with our ears, but we hear, let's say we hear noise with our ears, but we hear sounds with our brain. So the
Right,
linguistic
right, right,
processing
right.
center of your brain parses out sounds. And this is something that, like, I guess if you've never learned a foreign language, you might not think about it.
Hmm.
But different languages have different sound systems. And so when you are an English colonist, early English colonist, and you're like hearing this arakun sound, you're like, well, arakun, arakun. Oh, a raccoon, right? It's easy to misparse that sound because is an indefinite article in English. That's probably what happened here. A raccoon. Oh, just raccoon, right? Not a
Hmm.
raccoon. A, a raccoon, because it would be weird to say a raccoon, right? So it does not get borrowed in as a.
Right.
There's no.
Yeah.
You see what's happening here? So
It's
this
different
is
uses of articles like the and a in
exactly,
different
yeah,
languages affect how it comes
yeah,
in. And this
exactly,
also affects pronunciation of like pidgin languages when they come about.
one hundred
What
percent.
someone's native language is affects how they're going to interpret a word and different sounds.
Yep. Many
And why
such cases.
Japanese people can't pronounce R's.
Yeah,
Try
well,
to have them say Lululemon. It's impossible.
and that's because a lot of, like, in the case of Japanese, which I do not speak, not an expert in, but so don't come for me if I make a slight error. But the R and L's, so R's and L's are different sounds in English. They are not different sounds in many Eastern Asian languages. And so a Japanese speaker is not going to hear a distinction between R and L, and you can repeat it over and over again. And unless they're learning English, right, then they have to practice actually making that sound distinction. But if they're not really, like, if they're just trying to reproduce the sound, they're going to have a hard time doing that if they've never had an encounter with English before, because English parses those sounds out differently than Japanese does.
Mhm.
And so the R here in the original, let's see, yes, yeah, the dark L,
Yeah,
yeah,
the
Polish letter,
Polish
yeah,
letter has been
yeah.
adopted by many American languages to their alphabet. That's interesting. So in the Polish alphabet, sorry to interrupt this, but
Oh, interrupt away.
that's awesome. And I think Ironheart is Polish. We were doing some Hungarian Polish. I don't know if you know about the. There's literally holidays in Poland and Hungary for like Hungarian Polish brotherhood.
Oh,
But
interesting.
yeah, and I am three-quarters Irish, but the other quarter is Hungarian. The Polish letter has been adopted by many American languages to their alphabet. The Navajo and Dene.
Dene,
I I wait, Dene, is that because
Dene, like the
the
nod.
Navajo are called Dine,
Well,
and
yeah, because
it's just the
yeah,
same thing, right?
it's a complex thing. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
so that sound. Oh,
I
you're Polish
believe
American, right? My bad.
I believe the reason that the certain Native American languages have that the barred L is because actually of early U.S. American linguists who went and actually did a lot of the initial recording of Native American languages in an attempt to kind of save them or at least record them. We're using an earlier phonetic alphabet that is not the International Phonetic Alphabet, and it had barred L as one of its characters. I do believe
Got
that's
it.
where that comes from. Yeah,
And the sound works though
it
for
works.
those
Yeah, I mean,
languages.
it's fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um. Anyhow, so yeah, it would be weird to say a raccoon. It's a lot easier to say a raccoon, right? So this is what happen. One of the examples of what can happen when you borrow a word completely outside of your wheelhouse, completely outside of English. You're just going to parse everything differently. You're going to hear the sounds differently. I am almost certain that the R sound in the original Powhatan was a tapped or a trilled R, not an er. Is a very English R, and that sound in English is, like, cross linguistically around the world, is very rare, and it's actually one of the hardest to bring it back to the whole. People who speak Japanese have a hard time making that sound. It's actually one of the hardest sounds that people have to learn when they're learning English. Is our weird ass We think of it as this kind of normal R sound. It's actually very bizarre, very
Okay.
strange.
So it
So
and then that sound comes up in some Native American languages as well as Polish, just randomly.
no, 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 no. Like, so
Oh,
it
I'm
would
sorry.
be arakun. It'd be a ra ra ra. But
Oh,
right,
oh, okay.
an English colonist is not gonna. They're gonna go ra ra, right? Because that's
Right.
their closest sound to ra ra. It's ra ra.
Right.
So this is what we
Right.
call, to throw out a $20 word, phonological integration. So this is many, and you can tell how old a loan word is based on how phonologically integrated it has been usually.
Are you saying phonological
Phono
or phron?
phonological. Yeah.
Phonological. Okay, I think
Yeah.
I
So
can
like
kind of
related to
parse out what
phonology.
that means.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's integrated into the new language, right? So in this case, we're picking it right out of Powhatan. We just know it's the word for this new creature, and we're just like, whatever, we'll say it like we'll do our best, which is not great, and we'll say raccoon, and not
Yeah.
understand that it actually comes from a whole like word that meant a whole statement. He washes with his hands. That's completely lost, right?
Right.
On English speakers, and that's fine, right? I mean, because it's not. It's just that it is still the name of the creature. Um,
Yeah, it kind of
yeah,
reminds me about written language when you have like hieroglyphics, petroglyphs that represent an actual thing, and then over time they're simplified to become something that is completely separate from its original meaning that you can't tell. It's like an abstract form.
yeah. It's well, yeah, and that's yeah, because it's being taken out of its original linguistic environment, and is undergoing kind of fun, crazy, wonky stuff. If I can give a
Yeah.
counter example, or maybe not even it's not even a counter example. So it has to do with raccoons. So English, specifically American English, although now it is just the English word for the animal is raccoon. Um, as attested by Paul McCartney in the Beatles song, even the Brits will say raccoon. Um, so that's one example of we're confronted with a new word, idea, concept, thing. In this case, creature. We'll just borrow to the best of our ability the native language. Although note that this word is from Powhatan. Many different Native American groups had very, very different words for raccoons. Why
Right.
is it raccoon in English and not something else from another tribal language? Because this is the one that English speakers encountered first, and the fact that Powhatan was originally spoken in Virginia tells you a lot because of things like Jamestown. So you can see also the
Right.
history of cultural contact based on where did English get the loan word from. So even if we didn't know, maybe we had an extreme Roanoke situation. We just had completely forgotten about Jamestown. I don't know. Imagine some bizarro world where we just completely didn't know. We don't know where the English first landed. We don't know where the first colony was. We could go, yeah, but look at this raccoon word. Oh man, where was that originally said? We wouldn't be able to tell exactly maybe where if we had no physical evidence of Jamestown or written evidence, but we could say, look at that loan word. Where was that originally spoken? Powhatan was originally spoken in and around what is today Virginia. Okay, it must have been somewhere around Virginia, right? So we could use the loan word to kind of make up for that lack of physical and textual evidence if we were missing it somehow. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. And so we can do that in other historical instances where we don't have textual or physical evidence. You can use loan words to kind of make an educated guess, right? Where was that
Right.
cultural
Right.
contact first happening? It's not 100% like foolproof way of doing it, but it's pretty good, right?
Yeah,
It's
that's
relatively
pretty
good.
conclusive to me. How else would it have happened? It's the best explanation,
It's the
right?
best explanation, yes. I did not know that about spruce. That's fascinating.
Yeah, so English spruce comes from the Polish Zyprus from Prussia because the English massively imported timber products from the Baltic after they chopped down their medieval forests.
Yeah. In the Industrial Revolution and its consequences.
Seriously, every time. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's like a contextual thing as well with language is that like even if it's not you went to a place and this was the name of a thing, there's other examples where because of the context in which that product or whatever it is, whether it be a tree or an animal, like the language of the people who are associated with that thing might enter into it without any actual geographic contact in the area that it's adopted.
Right, and there's
Um,
actually in that. I mean, I'm not a Polish speaker at all, so feel free to correct. Please do correct. But I believe the z is actually a preposition there. So we're borrowing a preposition and thinking it's part of the word when it's actually not part of the word in Polish.
mm,
Spruce is
interesting.
spruce, but yeah, it's like no, because this is not a productive preposition sound in English, so we're completely misparsing that, right? Like we're just, oh
Right.
yeah, it must be the kind of the tree. right? So that's another example of that. Thank you for that wonderful example. Like, yeah, and this isn't just hating on English speakers, right? This happens back and forth. Whenever loans happen, you have the potential, the high potential for misparsing, misunderstanding, kind of mispronouncing the sounds. And it's also kind of fun, right? You can attempt to reconstruct how those speakers in the new language were processing the sound from a language they didn't speak, or didn't speak well, maybe. So we've talked a lot about raccoon. That's an example of just a straight up loan word. You can also get, when confronted with a new world species, or just a new species, a new something, a new idea, a new whatever, you can get, languages have a couple different choices. You can also just make a new word based on pre-existing words. And that's, one is not better than the other. It just depends, for various sort of reasons that are probably lost to time, exactly why speakers chose to go one way or the other. Unfortunately, there's no Wiktionary entry for this because the language is so kind of, unfortunately, dying. So I'll just speak if I can. I know that's not maybe not, yeah, many such cases. There is a variety of German that comes actually not, well, it originally comes from Germany, but it's been spoken for several generations in the hill country of Texas. This is called Texas German. I have done fieldwork on Texas German. It's a great language. It sadly is, I doubt anyone, I mean, there may be some real old timers who still can speak it, but even back in the 2010s when I was going out and recording it with other people, yeah, there you go. I found it. Texas German. There's not going to be an entry for the word, but yeah, you can get an idea of the. Yeah. So Texas German was spoken for generations in Texas. So like the speakers of Texas German are not German in the sense that they're from Germany. Most of them had never even been to Germany. They just grew up speaking German in these communities, not just at home, but for many generations out in like the streets, at church. These were isolated settlements in the Comancheria, so they were surrounded by Comanches, which is a whole other history.
Oh gosh.
They didn't know that when they arrived.
Surrounded by.
Well, they were purposely sold land in an area that would probably get them killed, but they didn't die.
Right.
So
that's awesome. Sold by the Mexicans, I assume. That's how.
No, by Anglo-Texans.
Ah, great. So the Anglo-Texans got tricked by the Mexicans, and then they tricked the.
Essentially, yes. Right. Many such cases. Yes, it's so these were, for miles and miles around these settlements. We're talking in the 1800s here, like 1840s, 50s, 60s, and then after the Civil War as well. You would just have like hardly any other even people that you could speak to. So it was actually perfect environment for linguistic preservation. We call these language islands. They don't have to literally be on an island. They can be, you can have an island in the middle of the Texas Hill Country.
Metaphorical
islands. Yeah.
No contact with outside people.
I mean, there was some contact with the outsiders.
Right. I'm sorry, not no contact, but little contact.
Little. Like you would, adults would need to learn English to talk to like Texas state officials, cattle traders. So anytime you're going into like a bigger city, obviously nobody's going to speak. Not very few people are going to speak German, but like growing up at home, in the house, in the church, at the doctor's office. I mean, it's all German. So this is, and it's cool for many reasons. One of which
Franz
is that
Boas, which is one of the most famous cultural anthropologists of all time, wrote a book on it, I guess.
No, that's Hans Boas, not Franz.
Oh,
that's Hans.
Oh, okay. No, I see it here. Dr. Hans Boas. Okay.
By the way,
different Boas.
Different Boas, but Hans is a baller guy. I love Hans, and shout out to Hans. He's a great German, wonderful man.
He's probably a linguist rather than.
He's a linguist. Yeah, he's a linguist. And no relation to the best of my knowledge, but he does love that happens to share the name.
I'm really glad you caught that, because that is a stupid claim from me. I see the name Boaz, and I'm immediately thinking of Franz.
Yeah. So Texas German is very interesting in that it's several different dialects of German from various different parts of Germany smooshed together in the Texas Hill Country, because people came from all over Germany to emigrate. And so then they're just thrown together. So there's a cool kind of mishmash that happens that produces this wonderful new dialect. But obviously there's a metric, as I always like to say, a metric crap ton of influence from the predominant surrounding language, which is English, and not just English, but Texan English. And so so like, what do you do with this new raccoon creature? Right? Again, we're faced with the Texas Germans were faced with the same problem, linguistic problem that the English colonists were faced with hundreds of years before. There's this new creature. It's kind of like devious and fun, but I don't want it in my house. What do I do with it? What do I call it? They're running around, right? So they're not being confronted with Powhatan speakers who say raccoon, and they have they do have some contact with Anglo-Texans who would have called them raccoons, but they're so isolated, right? At the same time, so it's like, well, we don't really know what to call this creature, so they just create a new word for the raccoon, which is in Texas German. Now you're going to laugh at the pronunciation because it's German, but there's a huge Texan accent on most of it.
And there's no friendly relations with natives here because they're surrounded by Comanches.
Yeah, the Comanches are not like. Yeah, there's no chance. Yeah, they're not going to. Yeah. Exactly. Good point. They're not necessarily like. They're not going to be like, "Hey, dear Comanches, what do you call this creature?" And I need to look up the Comanche word for raccoon. I actually don't know that because I don't know all languages, but I should look it up.
I'll look it up while you're talking.
Yeah, they 100 the Comanche 100% had a word for this creature. So what the Texas Germans do is they're like, well, it kind of looks like a cat. Or rather, no, it kind of looks like a bear. Yeah, kind of looks like a bear. Raccoons kind of look like bears, right? Don't they kind of look like bears, sort of? And what do they do? Yeah. What do they do with their hands? They wash. So the wash bear. The wash bear.
God.
So
I hate that so much.
Why do you hate that? That's great.
No, I don't hate it in a literal sense. I just like I shouldn't have even said that. I don't hate it. That's funny.
So there's another funny. So another funny example is the word skunk. So the word skunk is another one of these early loans into American English. It's also from Algonquian, and it would have been pronounced something like, let me see what the Powhatan version would be. Something like probably a little bit like Chicaquwa, which in Algonquian languages means fox that urinates, which is hilarious. I can send you this link. So that's what skunk literally means, is fox that urinates, because they're kind of like a fox, and man, do they spray. It's a very noticeable spray.
Yeah.
So, but Texas Germans confronted with the same linguistic problem. Well, we got these little like fucking little stinky guys running around, and we don't really have a contact with the natives to know what they're called, and we don't really have deep contact with Anglo-Texans, at least for the first initial stages of the German settlement. So I don't know what to call them. What do we call them? Well, they're a really big problem. They stink. So like a Texas German would call that a Stinkkatz. The Stinkkatz, the cat that's stinky. The stinky cat.
They're so efficient, dude.
It is. Another example, I can send this in the chat here, is the word opossum. Yeah, North America's only native marsupial. Please don't kill them. They're wonderful creatures, and they actually help reduce rabies. So please preserve the possums. They're really cool.
They seem dirty, but they're not.
They're not. Possums are wonderful creatures. I love all the misunderstood creatures, you can tell. So the word opossum is also an early Powhatan loan into English. It literally meant white animal. I mean, I guess they have a white face if they're not dirty, right? So it's white animal. But again, the Texas Germans don't have contact with, not very much contact with English speakers, nor do they have contact with Powhatan speakers. Sadly, the Powhatan speakers had all either died or the language had completely gone away at that point. But even by the 1840s, when the Germans started arriving in Texas. So, well, what do you do? It's a similar kind of issue. Like this crazy freaking rat creature thing. I don't know. It's got a pouch. It does weird shit. It hisses at me, and I don't know. So, well, what I'm going to call it? I'm going to call it a the Beutelratte. The Beutelratte. So the bag rat. So the bag rat.
They're kind of like a rat. I love the names. They just name things what they are.
Yeah, it's like the rat with a bag, right? I don't know. I mean, it's a marsupial, right? Like it's got a naked tail, right? So I mean, these are just these are just some fun examples with like backyard critters in the North America of like, you can either loan in a new word or you can just make your own. But both of these are examples of linguistic contact, right? Of language contact. You're in this case, it's that speakers of one European language, whether it's English or German are confronted with a brand new world, a brand new place with brand new things. But that doesn't have to be the only time that you can borrow words in, right? Like English is chock full of French words because, as we always like to say, or as I always like to say, because of the Normans. The Normans who invaded England essentially became the ruling elites, and those elite words trickled on down. I think I talked about this last time I was on.
Yeah.
That's why it's a pig when it's alive, but what happens when it's prepared and nice and fancy and you're going to eat it? What does it become? A pork, yeah, or
Right.
just pork, yeah. It's a cow when it's mooing, and when it's a steak, it is beef. So this is from pork, beef. So English has these and all sorts of all sorts of quote unquote more fancy words in English are actually, they're not even modern French, they're Norman French. This isn't because English speakers went out and found a new place or conquered a new place. It's because somebody conquered them. Yeah. Yeah, again, yes.
Again,
yeah.
as in like the Anglo-Saxons and the Romans before.
Yeah, I mean, everyone just keeps invading England, right? And bringing new words and things with them.
Right.
Was
Norman French like itself a Creole language of?
It wasn't a Creole, but Norman French itself shows distinct markers of contact with Norse.
Right.
With Norse, and so Norman French coming into England introduces a lot of new words into English. It doesn't make a huge amount of structural changes to our language. It just introduces a ton of words, which, I mean, that's a significant contribution, but it doesn't necessarily do a ton to our grammar. What did do a ton to our grammar is actually the Vikings who didn't go down to northern France and become the Normans. The Danes who invaded and settled whole parts of northern England. They essentially, what happened, and this will piss some people off in certain schools of linguistics, but I don't care. What happened? This is clearly what happened. You had Viking men marrying Saxon women and having mixed language households. And in that household, you had dad who did not speak very good Anglo-Saxon, spoke it very reduced, very poorly, broken Anglo-Saxon, and mom who spoke probably fluent Anglo-Saxon, but had to learn broken Norse to communicate with her husband. And so then children are raised in these sort of mixed linguistic environments, and are probably there's probably a fair amount of bilingualism, and there is some evidence. There's actual textual evidence to this as well in sort of what was the Danelaw, modern day Northern England. There was a fair amount of bilingualism, but eventually, right, the Danes stopped coming. They stopped, new Danes stopped coming. And so there's families that were once Danish, but they're now mixed families, Danish and Anglo-Saxon. And essentially this, from what started out as adult Danes not perfectly learning English, eventually just becomes the new English. And this is probably most likely what led to the vast amount of change in our grammar when you go from Beowulf to Chaucer. When you go from Old English to Middle English, there's just a complete shift in the language, so much so that you can look at Beowulf, and if you're not trained, if you're not a hyper nerd like me, you're I can't understand this.
Yeah.
But you can look at Chaucer, and you're it's spelled weird, but if I say the Canterbury's, to Canterbury they wende, oh, that to Canterbury they went. That sounds like funny English, right? Yeah. So Middle English is sort of recoverable from us.
Dutch is funny German.
It's not just
similar to English, more so Middle English.
Yeah,
but
Middle English really feels English. Whereas if you look at Beowulf, weird byd fularad. I mean, what is that? I don't know what that means. It means fate is inescapable. But you look at Old English, what weird byd fularad? I'd have no idea what that means. None of those words are recoverable for me as a modern English speaker. So that was probably, and that's another example of language contact, where the huge amount of contact in the northern part of England between English and Norse really did change a lot of things structurally in English. But note that was over a long time period, and there was a significant amount of Norse influence. It's not like English speakers showing up on the shores of Virginia and being hey, we're taking your shit. Oh, what's this new animal? A raccoon? Cool. And then Powhatan Powhatan speakers couldn't maintain linguistic integrity in the face of that. So we get loan words from Powhatan, but it's not like Powhatan is influencing English grammar, whereas
in
the
a
Vikings
structural sense.
structural sense, whereas the contact with Vikings was so long and prolonged that it really did do some stuff to like the nuts and bolts of or the operating system of English.
Right.
An example I bring out, and this will piss off people, but I don't care.
I don't think
Yeah,
there's many like PhD linguists who are the only people
this
who
will
would care
piss
about this
people off, but
listening to this.
I do not care because it's Occam's razor. It's the most logical explanation.
Right.
The word for they, they, the third person plural pronoun in Old English has nothing to. It does not sound like they at all. It's sia, which sounds a lot like German Z.
That sounds like yes in Hungarian. I'm sure it's not related, but
it's not related.
Yes in Hungarian.
Yeah, but what's the modern English word for they? Well, it's they. Okay, well, they and sia, those are not related words. They're just not. What happened? What likely happened was that there was so much cultural contact, linguistic contact between speakers of Norse and
hello, not yes. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, you're good. There was so much cultural and linguistic contact between speakers of Norse and English that they influenced even our pronoun system. So the word for they in Old Norse is their, and it's still also the word for they in modern Icelandic. So hello to the Icelanders. Bless, bless. I love Icelanders. Maybe there's an Icelander out here watching. But so their.
There are some Icelandic people that do watch the podcast. I know that for a fact.
Cool. Bless. Yeah. So their. Well, that their, they. Yeah. So we can tell, and this is going to piss people off, but there was so much contact between English and Norse that it didn't just change things like getting rid of grammatical gender on nouns in English. It didn't just simplify our verbs out somewhat. It actually influenced the pronouns, like the real everyday words that you use to refer to people, places, and things. That's just proof that like there was just a huge amount of contact between Norse speakers and English speakers. Again, there's a whole school of linguistics that would like probably crucify me for saying that, but they can go get wrecked. I don't care.
Good.
Yeah, I don't. There's 5 people who are gun for me, but that's okay. I'm crafty like a raccoon, and I can run away. I can hide in a trash can. I'm not above hiding in a trash can. You got a little comment here if you want to look at that.
Yeah, my favorite is the buffalo, which is a Spanish loan word from Greek for wild ox. The irony being that they already had a word for bison, but by the time of Columbus, the European bison was only native to Poland, where we call them. Not going to pronounce that right.
Is that Zuber?
Zuber,
something like that.
Sounds like sherbet.
Yeah. So you can have. So I guess loan words are an example of at least brief language contact. Changes like we have in English are from Norse influence are a result of deep language contact.
Right. Prolonged more of a population.
Yeah.
And also it's contextual, right? Because it depends, like a smaller population can have a larger effect on the language, like you see with the Normans if they're in specific positions. Or it's in the context of like trading or something.
Right. The Normans were elites, and they were largely they did have some contact with Saxon speakers, but they're not contacting peasant. They're not having everyday contact with peasants, right? It's not the same. Like it's very much they're stuck. They would probably have spoken some very bad English, and then amongst themselves they would speak Norman French. And Norman French was the prestige language that the Saxon nobles wanted to learn in order to, go up to the ladder, moving on up Jefferson style, getting on up in the world. And I can speak Norman French because I'm so fancy. Ha ha ha.
Right.
Right.
And there's still a bit of that today in America. Like I remember like learning French at my, I'm from a middle class town in Connecticut, which is to say upper middle class because Connecticut's a rich state. And like the rich kids wanted to learn French. Like it's viewed as like a status thing to learn French.
Right.
Whereas English is very like across the world. If you go outside the United States, people learn English for economic development because they can make more money doing it because it profits them to do so, which is also why Irish disappeared.
Yep.
In a lot of ways.
Yeah. Sorry, well, no, you're good. No, this is all part of it. So yeah, I mean, so I guess loan words are kind of like it could be intensive language contact, but even a moderate amount of language contact is probably going to give you loan words. At least it runs the possibility of giving you loan words.
Hmm.
English, as a general rule, is a language that's more friendly with loan words. We're more likely to take them in. I think probably because we've taken so many in historically. Whereas German has loan words. German's a little less. I mean, they're taking more words now from English, but even then, like comparatively speaking, German has some English loans, it has some French loans, but not like English has loan words. Like English is really okay with taking in other words, obviously cramming them through our English filters and, churning out possum or raccoon based, which is a
Right.
different pronunciation from what they originally were. Um, so, and then obviously so even some moderate amount of language contact will give you words. More language contact in the case of like Middle English will give you structural changes. Um,
Hmm.
English is still English is not Norse. English is not Danish. Those are different languages, related but different. But clearly there was Danish/Norse influence on English.
So,
Um,
can you
mhm.
define pidgin and
Well,
creole just
that's the
for,
next step.
yeah.
That's the next step. So in the case of English, we have intense language contact changing our structure. A pidgin and a creole, creoles come out of pigeons, but we'll group them together for just right now as I introduce them. Pigeons and creoles are the example of what happens when you break a language apart with a sledgehammer and then try to put it back together. Sorry,
Hmm.
correction. You break apart at least two languages, but usually more than two. You like little Lego bricks, and you put them to like you tear up the Lego instructions. You don't know how to make the X-wing anymore. You're like, oh crap, and then you just throw in a lot of pieces of Legos together, and then you're like, okay, now build me an X-wing. Right? Did you ever have this encounter as a kid where you lost the instructions and you're like, oh, I'm gonna have to figure out how to build the X-wing now or something like that? Maybe this is
Yeah.
just me. Yeah,
No,
I just
no, yeah, definitely.
yeah.
I still
So
build Legos sometimes.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then you're trying to put together an X-wing, which is a stand-in for language, a fully functioning language with bits and pieces from other languages. That is essentially what happens with pigeons and creoles. So, English coming into contact with Norse is more like, oh, hey, I like the way you build that tower. I'm going to maybe copy a tower on my side.
Hmm.
Right? A loan word is like, I like your piece. Can I just have your piece? Can I just have this one piece Lego piece? Right, that's a loan word. Pigeons and creoles is
Yeah.
really like, I don't know how to put. It's all broken. My older brother came through and broke it all, and burned the instructions. I have to put it together. So pigeons and creoles come out of situations wherein there is no common language, but usually there is like urgent, immediate need for communication. A pigeon is, I think you mentioned this earlier, and you were quite right in doing so. A pigeon is not a fully fledged language. Pigeons are not, they're not capable of talking about all the nuances of human experience. You cannot translate Henry V into a pigeon, although you can translate it into a Creole. So
And
pigeons,
pigeons can become creoles over
right?
time, right?
Pigeons
Yeah.
have no native speakers. So a pigeon has zero native speakers. There's nobody who is raised in a pigeon. However, there are people, many people, billions of people who are raised in a Creole language. And so essentially, Creoles are what happens when pigeons are stabilized and spoken for long enough, and people start being raised in households where at least one, but ideally both parents, or the entire clan, depending on kind of how your housing situation is speaking this Creole with each other. Children are raised in the Creole. And that's that, or rather, raised in the pigeon. Then it becomes a Creole, and that's a process. That's not like you can't like throw a switch and all of a sudden we determine, oh, it must have become a Creole at this date at this time. Hardly anything in
It's a
linguistics.
spectrum, right?
It's a
That's why there's so many
spectrum, right? Yeah,
arguments about this.
it's a spectrum. I mean, some of us live permanently on the spectrum, and so does language. It is largely a spectrum. Speaking from
especially
personal,
especially both the guests, the host, and the listeners to Illegitimate Scholar. I think there's quite a bit of that.
many such
Yeah.
cases. Yeah, yeah. So, and this is a thing that people who spend a lot of time working on pigeons and creoles, they're doing the Lord's work. It's good work. They're trying to figure out at what point case in point, to use an American example, we have at least two Creole languages that are spoken in the United States, which is pretty cool. We have Gullah, Gullah Geechee area speaking areas of South Carolina and coastal South Carolina and Georgia. I'm not a Gullah expert, so I'm gonna reference it and say it's great. I'm not going to talk about it because I don't really. I'm talking out my. I will be making stuff up, and I don't want to misrepresent it. It is a really cool language. Gullah is a Creole language.
How do you
It's
spell
really
that? I can look this up.
Gullah, I believe, is how it's spelled. I can send you a
Okay.
link too. Yeah,
No,
Gullah.
no, it's okay. I
Yeah.
got it. Keep going.
Gullah is related historically to other what are called Atlantic Creoles or Atlantic Creole Englishes. You think of Cool Runnings, Jamaican patois is or Bob Marley, Jamaican patois is one of these. Belizean Creole, if you've ever been to Belize, they speak Belize Creole down there. The Trinidad Tobago speaks a Creole English. The Bermuda Bajan Creole is spoken down there. So Gullah is the kind of the U.S. American sort of cousin to these languages. Comes out of slaves taken from multiple parts of West Africa who did not all speak the same language in most
Or even
cases.
the same language family.
Or even the same language family, being thrown together, trying to figure out how to talk to each other. The surrounding prestige language is English, but you would maybe use that to talk to an overseer or something like that. That doesn't necessarily help you in talking to each other, right? And most of the time, slaves were drawn from in most cases, slaves were drawn from different linguistic areas in order to keep them from organizing. Because if you keep people from talking to each other, it keeps them fractured.
And that's what they ran into when they were originally enslaving Native Americans.
Right.
They could talk to each other. Yeah. Yeah, it's dark, but
it is dark.
True.
But Gullah Geechee is a great language. It is its own language. It's not English. It's a Creole language. It is sadly endangered. I'm not an expert on it. I would like to actually go visit some areas down there in the coast there to actually try to talk to some people if they would. They have revival programs and stuff like that. They are trying to keep it going. The influence from standard American English is just so strong. I mean, it is the prestige variety, and it's not
a lot of these languages die in the modern era. They just
go away. There's also an issue too in the Gullah Geechee speaking area with ridiculous property laws that are essentially depossessing families of their traditional land, which is a real crappy thing. And so that is also accentuating the death of, well, not the death, but let's say that it's making Gullah Geechee more endangered because people are essentially they're not able to live in the place where they would historically have spoken the language. And so they move elsewhere and kids aren't raised in it. They're only speak standard American or certain varieties of African American English, which is its own variety, but it's not the same thing as Gullah Geechee. So it's this complex interplay between race, social class, status. I mean, it's like this complex thing in America, right? So Gullah Geechee is one of them. I bring it up here because it's just awesome and it's cool. I don't know much about it. There's like a New Testament translation you can read if you want. We have a note here.
Yeah, but I'm pulling these up, by the way. You don't have to respond.
Okay.
They come up. I pull them up. There's even more comments. I'm just pulling up the ones that I want to see. The English borrowed word shark and hurricane comes from the Mayan words shock, sea god, and hurricane for storm god. That's very cool.
Cool.
You guys know I love the Mayans very much. And then, yes, the word slave itself comes named after Slav. I don't know how that entered English. It must have come from Barbary pirate.
That's it. I believe. Yeah, that's a somewhat. So I'm not. All I'll say is that etymology of slave is somewhat contested. And I'll leave it at that. I don't know enough. Yeah, I know that it's somewhat contested, and I'll make some strong statements about things like Norse influence on English because I know something about that. I don't know something about the etymology of slave is so. I don't know. I'm not. I'm only willing to walk into certain battlefields, right? Like, so I choose my battles.
A lot of these debates in anthropology as well as linguistics are heavily politicized, just like the speaking of different languages is politicized itself.
Yeah. So the other American Creole language it's called pidgin, but it's no longer a pidgin. It's Hawaiian pidgin.
Right.
Pidgin. Yeah.
You had sent me some stuff on this. It's
Right,
pretty
wait,
cool.
blah.
So
Yeah, howdy boy.
before we share this, I should say that like a lot of these pidgin languages, especially the African and this Hawaiian one, they might initially sound funny, right? Like they sound like somebody just not speaking English very well, but like the way that they're saying them while from an emic from an etic perspective, rather an outsider's perspective, they sound like somebody who's just not very intelligent. That's what this how it sounds like is associated with. But that's not real. That's like our cultural conception of how somebody's saying that sounds. And I don't know why that is. I can speculate that maybe it has to do with, people speaking this way would have been associated like that. But the way that they're going to pronounce things is it just has to do with the way that their first language pronounced those things. So I don't want it to come across like we're making fun of it, but
No, we're not.
from
We're
an
not. Yeah.
right, like in even though like, but yes, I'm still going to enjoy that. It does sound a bit funny, but yes,
Yeah.
Hawaiian
Hawaiian.
pidgin.
Yeah. So, I mean, speakers of Hawaiian pidgin will call it pidgin. It is no longer a pidgin, but the name remains, and that's fine, right?
Many such
The
cases, yeah.
the pointy head word name for it is Hawaiian Creole English. And Hawaiian Creole English is a fascinating case of it's a plantation based language, but it's a different kind of situation because you're dealing with. I mean, I'm not going to say the conditions were much better than slavery. Theoretically, they were paid not very well. People being so it's a combination of native Hawaiians working on plantations in Hawaii to grow fruit largely, sugarcane too. Yeah, that one. And then people speakers of Filipino languages, Japanese, Chinese, and Portuguese coming to the Hawaiian Islands to work. Now, at this point in time, English is the prestige language because Americans are pushing out the Hawaiian royal family. So sadly, Hawaiian is no longer. I mean, there is still Hawaiian language. Obviously, there's still Hawaiian language today. Pidgin is not Hawaiian. That's an important distinction to make. Right. Hawaiian, we've talked about on the previous live stream, is a Polynesian language. It's a beautiful language. It's the original indigenous language of Hawaii. But
yeah. And very literally the first indigenous, because they were
there were no humans.
Undoubtedly the first humans to go there. Yeah. Maybe we'll find some evidence in the future, but very much doubt it. Yeah. They were definitely the first humans.
So
99%.
You have right. So Hawaiian is its own language. There's like really like three languages spoken today in Hawaii. There's Hawaiian, there's Pidgin, aka Hawaiian Creole English, and then there's standard American English. And they do interact with one another in fascinating, cool ways that probably don't have time to get into today because we're doing an overview. So Hawaiian Creole English, aka Pidgin, is actually what many people's, particularly in rural parts of Hawaii, their first language is Pidgin. It is not. They learn standard English when they go to school, but for many, there's all these articles you can find out there about teachers, high school teachers, elementary school teachers, middle school teachers in Hawaii kind of need to know Pidgin in order to explain concepts and words in standard English to these, because they come in not necessarily speaking standard English. They speak this closely related yet separate language that's called Pidgin, right?
But the structure of this language is rooted in English, not the Polynesian Hawaiian.
Right, because you have the native Hawaiians who managed to survive the smallpox and all the other things that Europeans bring in, Euro-Americans, bring in. It's very bad.
Including mosquitoes, sad. Although that one was probably an accident.
Yeah. And then you have all these other speakers, largely of various Asian languages, coming in and working. Okay, so we have to find a way to talk to each other. Well, what do the plantation owners speak? They speak English. Okay, so we need to understand them enough to figure out what we're supposed to do. How do we talk to each other? Well, I guess we'll kind of repurpose English to our own ends and make it work. But again, so Pidgin today is many Hawaiians' native language. It's their first language that they learn. But it comes out of a history of imperfect adult acquisition. So you have, if any of you, or Sam, if you or anyone else has tried to learn a foreign language as an adult, it's very hard to learn a foreign language perfectly as an adult. It is not easy.
Hmm.
I've done it for a few languages, and it took a lot of work. And even to this day, I don't speak perfect German. I speak very good German. Germans are always blown away until they realize I have a PhD. Wieso kannst
Yeah.
du so gut Deutsch? Oh ja, ich habe ja in Deutschland studiert, gelebt, gewohnt und so weiter. Oh, they're like, wow, you speak such good German. But yes, I speak very good German. But then there's still things that I have to look up. I still have to go talk to my native speaker friends. Like, how would you say this? I don't have a full grasp of the language because I was 18 when I started learning it, right? I'm an adult
Hmm.
learner. Imagine you don't have time to study at university and really perfect the language. Imagine you're thrown onto a plantation and you have to start figuring out what people want. Okay, you're going to learn it good enough to get the point across, but you're not going to have perfect acquisition.
And then
You
you're going to teach that to your kids in the home,
your
and
kids in the
the
home,
incorrect pronunciation
and
is going to be,
the
yeah.
kids are going to flesh it out into a full language. So, like I
Hmm.
said, pidgins you can't have are not a full language. Creoles are, and so
Hmm.
there has been a wonderful over the past, I would say, 2 decades or so. There's been a wonderful project in Hawaii to translate both the New and Old Testaments of the Christian Bible into pidgin, into Hawaiian Creole English.
Are the
Um,
Mormons leading this? There's lots of
no,
Mormons.
it's
Or I'm
actually
sorry, not.
more. It's more
No, it is
non-denoms.
Mormons.
It's more
Oh, it is.
non-denoms. Yeah, it's more
Okay.
non-denoms. It's more non-denoms. It's kind of not even confessionally aligned. It's just they're like because there's pastors and priests of various confessions who are like, our congregation doesn't understand this NRSV English translation because there's just words in there that are very like big and not big, but just
Yeah.
like they're like concepts that don't exist in Pidgin. The words themselves, I should say, the
Hmm.
concepts exist in Pidgin, but not the words themselves. So you have to go about saying it a different way in Pidgin. And so the pastors got kind of tired. Part of it, I think, is the history I read is they got tired of having to always explain these passages, and they're like, let's just do a translation from the Greek into Pidgin, so we don't have to have this
Whoa.
intermediary step of the standard English. Um,
Whoa.
yeah,
Wow. Yeah.
because
That's much better, but it's a
it's
much
much
larger
better.
undertaking.
Oh yeah, no, this is they're quite literally doing the Lord's work, quite literally. So John 1, I use this example because it's short and it has to do with the logos, the word, so that's very appropriate for language. So I'll read the King James version just because as a native speaker of English, I do love the KJV. I know it's not exactly accurate, but it's beautiful. It's Elizabethan. In the beginning
Hmm.
was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by Him, and without Him was not anything made that was made. Okay, that's more KJV and highfalutin.
Hmm.
I will do my best. I'm a Haole boy myself. I don't claim I'm not Hawaiian, but I have a great love for Hawaiians of all backgrounds. Hawaii is a beautiful melting pot of people, and the pidgin language itself is wonderful. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me bring it up on my end just so it's a little bit bigger,
Sure.
because
Go
otherwise I'm going to
ahead.
be squinting at it, and that's not great. Again, I will do my best. I am a Haole boy. 1,000 apologies, but I have a great love for Hawaiian Creole English. Okay.
I do as well. Obviously, I'm wearing my Polynesian necklace that I wear every single time I record.
Yep. All right. Here we go. So this is verses 1 through 3. The time everything went start had one guy. God, he talk. That's who him. God and that guy, they stick together. And that guy stay God for real kind. By the way, one of my favorite translations. And the guy stay
Yeah.
God for real kind. Oh my gosh, it's so Hawaiian. It's perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Like you
That's
got to
the
throw up a shaka when you're saying
I
it.
know, it's so good. It's This translation is beautiful. It's one of my favorite Bible translations in the history of Bible translation. It's so well done. It's so much love was poured into this. That's the guy. The time everything start, him and God stay tight with each other. God will make everything, but no way he do him. He tell this guy for do him. No more nothing this guy never make. Okay, so I'm assuming that most of us people who watch this channel speak English as a native language or speak English very, very well. I'm assuming they were taught standard English, whether it's British standard, Aussie standard, Kiwi standard, American standard, Canadian standard, whatever. They're all pretty close despite some regional differences. Standard English is by and large are very similar because they're all standardized. So if we compare this Hawaiian Creole English to standard American, there are many words that jump out at us as being the same or almost the same. Time, start, God, talk, for example. but the way now, and there's some other examples of sort of more phonetically written words. The instead of the,
Right.
together instead of together.
And this was before full like literacy. There, a lot of these
Yes,
people are not writing, so it's just going
exactly.
to be phonetic.
Yes. So yeah, for real. Kind is fascinating because it comes from kind, like type of kind in
Mm-hmm.
English, but it doesn't. It's not used that way in Hawaiian Creole English. It's used in a completely different way. So even just in verse 1 here, the time everything when start. Okay, I'm completely butchering the pronunciation, but I'm a Haole boy. So um, maybe if a more if we're to try to plug this back into standard English, the time when everything started, or the time everything started, something like that. So in standard English, we have this past tense form of start. What's the past tense form of start? Started. Okay, that is grammar. That's morphology, right? We know as English speakers, okay, if you tack an ed ending onto start, it makes it in the past. In standard English, that's how that works, but not in Hawaiian
Right.
Creole. How do we show the past tense in this first little clause here? Can you figure it out? Have you? Maybe you can. Sorry, I'm
I
taking over
lost.
as
No,
a
no, no.
teacher.
I know what you're
I'm
doing.
being a
I just
teacher.
lost the point. No, you
I'm
are,
being a
and you're
teacher.
doing it very well. That
Yeah.
is, I mean, as a guy with an education degree, certified teacher, not that means anything, but
So
the
the time
time
everything when
everything
start.
start.
How are we showing the past tense there if we're not using like that little ed ending on started? Because the Creole language doesn't have that. That's something that an English speaker would use, but not necessarily a pidgin speaker.
I can't. I want to figure it out, but I don't want to sit here with dead air trying to
Okay,
do
it's
it. The
okay.
time everything when
When
start.
when
When the
what
word
is
when.
when?
Okay.
Is the when there the question word when, or is it from English went?
Oh, I
Oh,
see.
so what?
When it
When it
started, but
start?
there's no ed.
Yeah, because the
Okay.
ed has dropped out because this is a Creole language, and Creole languages don't tend to have past tenses with endings on the verbs. They tend to use other words in the sentence to show the past tense.
Oh,
So
wow. Okay,
every
that's awesome.
every single one of in that first clause there of verse 1, every single one of these words is from English originally, but it's being used in ways that you would never use in English. I mean, you could maybe say went and started. It went and started. Fine, like you could say that as kind of a phrase. But even then, oh, he went and started cutting the grass or something like that. But even then, you wouldn't say he went start cut the grass unless you're speaking Hawaiian Creole English. He went start cut the grass. Oh yeah, right. Like that is something that you might hear on like the Big Island in a rural community. Somebody's got to go cut the grass, right? But
Mm,
it has to do with the when has nothing to do with going in the past tense. It's not about going in the past tense at all. It has to do with signaling that this is now how we do all past tenses, or at least certain kinds of past tenses, because it's actually more complex. But certain kinds of past tenses, this is how we do it.
yeah, that's cool. And
Um,
we did the
yeah,
disclaimer beforehand that yeah, we know how it sounds, but there are rules to this. Just like the African American vernacular English that
yep.
people like anti woke, not that I'm not anti woke, I mean I am, but I just have more nuance to it that people make fun of. But no, like there's reasons for that being like
I
it does have rules, even if it's perceived as just incorrect English.
I got a shout out. I got to do a shout out to one of my favorite, my academic hero and one of my favorite linguists of all time is John McWhorter. He's linguist. He's a linguistics professor at Columbia. Um, he wrote a really good book about Black English. He's adamant that it should be called Black. He's African American, but he says it should be called Black English.
Hmm.
He wrote an entire book on that. I can maybe even send you the Amazon link if people want to read it. It's really well written, and is in its own way. He's kind of a progressive, but he's sort of like a grumpy progressive, and he calls out people on his own side. So I give him some credit for that.
Love that. Yeah.
Um, he's a big actually got his start doing Creole linguistics, so that's kind of one of his big deals. I really like him. He let me see, let me find it here. Yeah, talking back, talking black. It's actually a really good. Let me send it to you here, so you can send it up if you want. I got to give him a
Yeah.
shout out because he's just such a cool guy. Again, academic heroes. We all have them.
That's
Um,
fine. I'll share it on the screen. I'll put the
yeah,
link
yeah,
below.
yeah. I sent you the Amazon link. It's pretty
Okay.
short. It's written for non-experts. It's very good. Um, whatever your racial background, you should read it because it's actually fascinating and cool. Um, all right. So Hawaiian Creole English. The cool thing about Creoles is they tend to exist. This is a common theme on a spectrum, like some of us.
On a
So
spectrum.
we're on a
Yeah.
spectrum. Hawaiian Creole English, actually, believe it or not, is pretty close to Standard English. This is a language that has always kind of been in contact with Standard English because of the public school system in Hawaii. The public school
Mm.
system in Hawaii teaches people how to read and write and also speak standard English, obviously with a beautiful Hawaiian accent, but right, the way that you talk in class, if you're a pidgin speaker, is not the same way you talk at home, right? There's a clear, you're code switching. You're in English class, you're reading whatever that day. You're probably,
Yeah.
not
And
going to be.
everybody code switches, by the
Everyone
way.
code
It's not
switches.
just a thing that minorities do. Everybody
Nope,
does it.
everyone code switches. Yeah, whether you
Yeah.
just don't notice it, probably. If you
Right.
say I don't code switch, you're just not noticing it.
If you think the way that I talk on a podcast isn't the same as the way that I talk to my buddies, then you're crazy.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm being pretty colloquial and relaxed here, but like the way I would talk at a
Right.
conference is very different than this, right? I would be making no spectrum jokes. I would be making no, references to right wing Twitter little phrases, right? I would be doing none of that. I would be way more presentable in my speech,
You're
right?
not calling anything based.
No, I would not call anything based. I would not say many such cases. They wouldn't understand what that means. Yeah, they're like, "What do you mean many such cases?" Yeah. So we all code switch. So Creoles usually are spoken in countries where the donor language, the major donor language, usually a European language, is also spoken. So in the case of Hawaii, it's in America, so there's standard American English, and you have Hawaiian Creole English coexisting alongside Standard English. In the case of Jamaica, you have Jamaican Patois, which is another beautiful Creole language.
Wow. And I put this link in the
yeah, it's really it's linguistics for people who aren't linguists. He does a great job of John McWhorter does a great job of explaining things with many cool, fun examples for non-linguists. I really dig. Yeah, his writing style is very
rare
good.
to find that.
Oh, I take the way I'm talking to you about this right now is basically just ripped right out of his playbook about how to talk about linguistics. It's all about making it understandable for people, because if I can opine for 2 seconds, language is just so fundamental to how we understand ourselves. I think everyone should be thinking about it. You don't have to be a linguist, but you should at least think a little about it, right? Because it's like fundamental to being a human. So anyhow.
Yeah, I feel the same way about culture. I think everyone feels that way about their field, but
we do.
I think there's a stronger point for language since everybody uses it.
Oh yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. So like in Jamaica, you have standard Jamaican English, which is heavily influenced by British English that coexists alongside Jamaican Patois. So different Creole like speakers will code switch in different in different settings. Sometimes they'll sound more Creole, sometimes more standard. That's definitely the case in Hawaii. It's definitely the case in places like Jamaica, because in those instances, Jamaica and Hawaii, the Creole languages, whether that's Jamaican Patois or Hawaiian Creole English, coexist alongside the standard versions of the European language. If we can go to, I know a place that you like to talk about, and let me know if you need me to shut up, because I could talk forever.
No. Yeah, it's okay. Whenever you before we go into something else, can you answer this question?
Mm-hmm.
Is it common for ancient words to be retained in rural areas? In rural North Carolina, they call cows and pigs bossy and suey, like the Indo-European goss/boss and sus.
Huh.
Does that happen in pidgin languages?
2 questions, very good questions. In rural areas, you are more. There's a higher percentage. There's a higher chance of certain words being retained. Yes. That I don't know about rural North Carolina specifically, so you would know that better than me. I'll look into that. I can say from the Texas German example, the words in Texas German, when they're not busy making new words for raccoons and skunks, they are actually Texas German retains stuff that was lost in Standard German today. So there's things that people do in Texas German that are from the 1800s that nobody in Germany does today. So yes, being in an isolated area theoretically increases the chance of older forms being retained. At the same time, it also kind of increases the chance of new forms being created. So it's kind of a yin and a yang there. There's something of a cycle to language change. So that could be a topic for a future episode. Might be fun. Does that happen in pidgin languages? To a certain extent, yeah. Sometimes what can happen in pidgin and creole languages is that the words that are borrowed in are of a really do kind of have a timestamp on them, like, oh, they must have come into contact with English or French speakers or Portuguese speakers, because you can have Creole languages based on different, European languages or even non-European languages. Maybe you came into contact with a clearly marked 18th century English word that is not really used in English anymore, but does have continues to have function within the Creole language. That can 100% happen. So yeah, you can have little fossils. You can have little mosquitoes trapped in amber, Jurassic Park style. That can totally happen whenever you have language contact. Yeah, that's actually one of the cool things about language contact, is it can actually preserve older forms, which is neat. Right. So in Hawaii and in Jamaica, and also South Carolina in the Gullah Geechee area, you have these Creole languages coexisting with the standard varieties. In a place like Papua New Guinea, yes, I guess English is a language that is spoken there, but it is not the primary language spoken in Papua New Guinea. It is not the lingua franca. It is not the language that people primarily use to talk to one another in Papua New Guinea. That is Tokpisin, which is also a Creole language. So I sent you, let's see. It's the one that looks less like English. It's the John one, but it's the Bipo Bipo Through one. If you can find that, put it up on screen. People can see what Tokpisin sounds like. So in Papua New Guinea, do I need to send it again?
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me
do I need to send it again? Yeah, just because it's the same text from John 1, but it's just the Tokpisin translation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's the one that looks really not like English anymore.
Yeah. Very
It's
different.
Like, what?
I wanted to go with this one first.
Yeah, it's good to start with that's why, the Hawaiian one the Hawaiian Creole looks more like standard English. Tokpisin is an English Creole language, and it is many people's native language in Papua New Guinea. Ironically, it's a Creole language, which are great, but it seems to also be pushing out some of the indigenous languages of Papua New Guinea. So double-edged sword there, I guess. It seems to be, this is just, it's the waves of time break upon the shore, and some languages do well, some languages don't do well, and it's all very sad when they wither. But I don't know what you're supposed to do, right? It's what are you gonna do? You're gonna make people not be able to speak their own language if that happens to be the major one. It's sort of this complex situation. So Tokpisin is an English-based Creole, so it bears some similarity to Hawaiian Creole in that. However, I think even just from a casual, non-linguistic perspective, you can just look at, this is the same text. Like the Hawaiian one, you could probably kind of figure out. I feel like you could probably figure it out, even though obviously it's different. This is bananasly different. Like this is crazy different.
Beepo. It almost looks like gibberish. Beepo, true. Time ogeta something I no come up yet. Talk stop. Yeah, I can't make it. It does look like gibberish. Frankly,
so all of these words were originally English. I will say that.
How?
How? So all of these words are originally English. So Tokpisin comes out of, again, a plantation situation where English speakers are needing to speak with native indigenous workforce, but because there are such a metric fuck ton of languages spoken in Papua New Guinea, well, which native language am I going to learn? It's not even worth learning, because most people are at least speak at least 3 or 4 languages there out of pure necessity. So we're going to have to figure out another way to do this. It's really hard to teach adult learners English. So, okay, we'll use, it's not like this was a plan, but this is what happened over time as well. We'll use English words and we'll put them together in a way that it can work. And we do it in a way that ends up becoming a different language. Okay. So I'll do my best. Again, I'm not a Tokpisin native speaker, but just to give you a sense of what this sounds like. Let me put it on my end here just so I can see. Bipo bipo through, time or get to something in no come up yet. Toki stop. One time God, na tok em yeti God. Bipo bipo through, toki stop, one time God. Long display talk that's or God in make him come up or get a something. Na in no got one bella something, it come up long, not a bella rot. No got or get a something, it come up. And talk yet, it make him come up. Okay, so that is not English. at all.
No.
And
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
but if you look at this, do some words jump out? Sorry, I'm going full teacher mode. Do some words jump out at you as being sort of Englishy or English
Well,
adjacent?
God's there.
God, yeah.
Most is
So if,
God.
and if we know we're translating John 1, which is from the Christian Bible. Okay, so we know it's something religious, right? There's God,
And something is
something,
obviously something.
or it comes from the word something.
Right.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah. Talk. What might talk be?
Talk. I
Talk,
stop. Talk.
talk.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Talk. But
I
if
just
we're
don't know why talk would be in this phrase, in this
because
passage.
talk means word.
I see.
Because what
Okay.
do you talk if not words? And if you're making again, the Legos have been scattered everywhere, and we're trying to build the X-wing with the Legos, but we don't even have the same parts anymore. We have certain parts of the X-wing, but not the one part we really needed. So, okay, I guess we can talk is kind of like word, right? So talk, okay, talk, I guess can be a noun, I guess word. So the word
Yeah.
logos in Greek, yeah. So talk is word. Um, Time, okay, that might be time, and it is. Bipo, before.
Pe- oh, I thought it was people.
No,
Beepo. Yeah.
before.
Before. So why do they
Before.
say it twice then? Before
Be-
true.
yes, because in Tokpisin uses English parts like Austronesian languages and Melanesian languages. So it's speaking English via another language. And so that's just called reduplication, where you repeat the same word twice or parts of the same word twice to emphasize certain things or show something grammatical. That's what Bipo is what's happening with Bipo here. So Bipo true. So before true. So something like verily or like truly before this time, before when time. Okay, so time, but it also
Yeah.
kind of means when
Okay,
time.
that makes
Yeah, it
sense.
also kind of means like when. Yeah. Olgeta. So that means like all, but it comes from all together.
All together, right?
If we to another Beatles reference, all together now.
And then it like
yeah,
conjunctions together based on probably their own
yes.
original first language
Well,
and
not
how they
even
speak it.
necessarily. That's the crazy thing about creoles is that you can get, so you can have like language A, B, and C come together and produce something that's D and is like actually weirdly its own thing. That's why creoles are like they're the world's youngest languages. They're brand new languages. They're like crying from their mother's womb, and they're beautiful like little babies. Yeah, they're really cool. Like this is just craziness, but in a great way. So ageta means all, something. Well, obviously that comes from English something, but we're talking about like existence here. Existence. So before everything, or before all substance or all existence, and then we have ino come up yet.
Come up. Nothing.
Come up.
Nothing
comes up or come up, but it also means create or was created in this case. So yeah, again, you see how these are all English words originally, but they're being used in ways that you would not expect as a native speaker of English.
Right. So comparing this to Hawaiian Creole, right? Like, okay, you said this language is from New Guinea?
Yes.
Creole,
this Creole comes out of contacts between English speakers and indigenous speakers in and around Papua New Guinea in general.
So, on New Guinea or on Papua, most of them are horticulturalists or hunter gatherers or a mix.
Yeah.
So like I have to assume, and correct me if I'm wrong here, that the structure of the language is going to be different based on what words they already have, and of course the Hawaiians, I don't want to use the term advanced because it's not a linear thing, but the Hawaiians had a more complex culture, so they're going to have more words associated with that culture.
I mean,
right? No,
not necessarily. No, because again, we're using English words in a way that's not English. We're using English words in a distinctly Papuan Melanesian way.
Okay, right.
But we're still sort of, because the admixture of native languages, there's just so many indigenous languages, there's just so many of them. It's not like there's one indigenous language that's contacting English here. This is like a lot of indigenous languages simultaneously.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I
So
see
we're
now.
defaulting to the prestige language, which is English, but we're going to default to it in a way that's decidedly not English. Hopefully this is making
Yes.
sense.
Right. Right. Right.
So that's
Right.
why if you want to look at beeple, which is just a fun word to say, I'm looking for
Yeah,
excuses
it
to
is.
say it.
Beepo.
Beeple,
I love
yeah.
that.
Um,
Yeah.
may this live stream be known as the Beepo episode.
Yes.
Before, so we have in English we have a fricative sound before. So a lot of Austronesian languages don't have a f sound. They have a p sound. So this is a reverse case of raccoon. Instead of English settlers misunderstanding Powhatan, we have indigenous Papuans mishearing the f as a p. Bipo, before. We can also tell that you can also tell here that they're likely coming into contact with either British or Australian speakers because there's no which would have probably been dropped anyhow. It's before or before. Crikey, Australia before Beepo. Beepo, because in the way that they're going to hear an English speaker, they're probably a non-rhotic dialect speaker because they're
Right.
probably either
Can you
Australian
explain
or
rhotic?
yeah. So rhoticity has to do with in English, rhoticity has to do with R sounds.
Mhm.
So I'm speaking a proudly rhotic dialect, as are you, Sam.
Right.
America, yeah,
Got
we're
this New
yeah.
England preppy accent.
So in non-North American, so hello Canadians, you also speak a rhotic dialect. Yes, yes, yes. In non-North American Englishes, oftentimes when an R follows a vowel, it is sort of not really totally pronounced. This is called a non-rhotic dialect. So an example would be the way a British speaker would pronounce what I would say is before. It would say before. Yeah. Whereas I
Yeah.
would say
Yeah.
before. It's one of the major distinguishing factors between North American and non-North American English. So if we think about the South Seas, there are some Americans doing things down there, but before the Americans were the Brits, right? And so they're unless they happen to be from like the West Country of England, they're probably not really having or Scottish. They're probably not having strong R or Irish. They're probably not having strong R's at the ends of syllables. And so before, Bipo, Bipo, okay, so that's like our closest equivalent approximation of what before was. But again, in this instance of Tokpisin, we're not using it in an English way at all. Before true, what does that mean? I mean, it sounds like you're having some sort of like, you're having a bad day, you're having a breakdown. Yeah, it's like before true, time all together, something come up yet. What does that mean, right? It's just not English anymore. Yeah, tok is stop. So tok word, and then stop. Oh wow, mixed German
Yeah.
and West Slavic. Yeah, that's
An
cool.
extinct Creole language. It makes sense that there would be a West Slavic and
Contact area.
German
Well,
Creole language.
and in Eastern Germany today, we have the sadly endangered, wonderful Sorbian language, which is a wonderful
Sorbian, not
Sorbian.
Serbian.
It's a no Sorbian, not Serbian. Sorbian. Serbian is South Slavic. Sorbian is West Slavic. The Sorbians are holding on for dear life to their language. The Germans are
Where
not.
is that?
Eastern Germany, like
Okay.
East, like Eastern. East, is it Niedersachsen? I forget exactly where. There's a couple regions of Germany where you will see bilingual signs. I don't do Sorbian at all, but it's a cool language. I want it to hold on. To give them a little credit, the German government is actually giving them money to try to hold on to it. I really hope they can. Sorbian is not Polish. It's its own language, although it is related to Polish, but it's its own thing. Yeah. So it would make sense that in Germany there was sort of a contact language happening there because of German and Western Slavic speakers. Yeah. So anyhow, yeah, tok is stop. Stop. What do you think that word comes from? It's an English word originally.
Where is that? Stop.
Stop. Tok stop. That at the end of just that end of the very first part of verse 1.
It sounds like stop,
and that's what it comes from.
Okay.
But it doesn't mean stop
before. So.
Yeah, no, it doesn't mean stop anymore. It means it's actually a way of saying existing for a long period of time. Because what happens if you stop in a certain place?
Oh,
You're
wow.
you're no longer
Yeah.
moving. So there's a couple different ways to say to be in Tokpisin, and one of them is stop, which comes from the English word stop, but it means it's a durative aspect. It's showing that you're durationally being there. And if you're thinking about the Bible, the logos is eternally proceeding from the Father, right? Here we go into theology. And so Nicene Creed, anyone? So it's continually staying. It's not stopping, but it's staying continually the logos, aka talk, aka tok.
Dude, it's so
So
cool.
yeah, anyhow, I'll shut up about this because we could go forever. But and I know you
No,
got to go
man,
at some
great.
point. But yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
we're gonna have to wrap it up here in a second.
But
So you
anyhow,
wanna
yeah.
yeah.
So Creole languages are really cool.
They are. They are very cool. Yeah.
So thank you for letting me spurg out about them because
Oh,
they're
dude,
fascinating
definitely.
and fun. Yeah,
Obviously, people
yeah.
that watch me wanna hear stuff like this. Great. Okay, is there anything else you want
Well,
to
we could go
cover?
through
Any?
this word by word, but I mean, it would take too much time, I think, because again,
Yeah, yeah.
all of these words are originally English.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Wow. That's crazy that there it's like a non-literal, like I assume it comes from the way that they speak their own languages, right?
to a certain
Like not
extent. Yeah,
language,
there's
but
actually
languages, the
yeah.
way they
There's a
think about words.
one final little example is the way that Tokpisin does pronouns is fascinating. So they actually using English parts, they've recreated a Papuan pronoun system. So there's a distinction between so the word for I is me. The word
Okay.
for actually I can send you this link if you want. I know you got to go at some point here, but this is pretty. If you're digging this is just a quick little example here. Just send it to you in the chat. So the word for I is me. Okay, kind of understandable. The word for we, as in more than one of us, is mipla. It's spelled like me pella, so me fellow. If you scroll down on the Wikipedia page, you can see the pronoun system. There's a little table right there. Yeah. So the just the straight plural form for English we would be mipla. It comes from me fellow. But there's also a distinction between duals and trials because Papuan languages tend to distinguish between 1, 2, and 3. And so mi tupla, me two fellow, me tripla, me three fellow. And this works for you and he, she, it, em. And then they also distinguish between inclusive and exclusive. So like mipla would be we not including you, whereas you mipla or you me is you and me
Oh my gosh.
inclusive. So that is 100% from Papuan languages and local languages because they do that in
Mm,
way more extensive ways. But they've attempted to recreate it. They've recreated it a little bit with English parts. So that's just maybe a final parting example of how cool this language is. Yeah. So
yeah. It's awesome, man. Yeah, thank you. You want to tell people where to find you and your own stuff?
yeah, I'm on YouTube at the Wandering Humanists. I'm actually not. I want to get back into linguistics. We're actually doing a more literary, philosophical stuff. Yeah, you can find me on Twitter. Unfortunately, my my I didn't think about this. My handle is in German, so that's might be a little bit hard. But als
Yeah.
Philologe,
I'll link
ALTPH.
it down below.
Okay, yeah, it means philologist in German, which was kind of what I do.
Right.
Yeah,
Philology being a field that isn't really talked about anymore.
yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, on my channel we talk a lot about literature stuff, religious stuff, language stuff, folklore. I kind of mesh them all together because that's kind of what philology was all about, mixing linguistics and cool other stuff together. So I try to do that. But yeah, thanks again for having me on, and
Yeah.
thank you for the wonderful comments and questions. I'm going to look into those things as well. So there's some new stuff that yes, plenty good one. Yes.
Did you just translate that into one of these Creole languages? That's
Yeah,
awesome.
that sounds like patois to me a little bit. Yeah, a little bit like
Awesome.
Jamaican patois. Yeah.
All right. Well, yeah. So if you want to listen to more of my stuff, check out some of the other live shows on the channel. Subscribe, like it, and check out Doc Brown on Twitter and his YouTube. Links down below. Yeah. Thanks so much for coming, man. We'll have you on again
Sounds
anytime.
good.
Anytime you have an idea, you can come back
Oh,
on.
I got ideas.
I know you do. Yeah. All right. Later, everybody.
Thank you.